I have a new word in my vocabulary now. You heard it a little bit earlier, Ubuntu. It is a South African word. It comes from the Zulu and the Xhosa people. It's a word I share with you because I believe that it speaks to the heart of what it means to be human. It's been said that there's something about Africa that once you've been there, it never leaves you. This summer, I had the great privilege to be able to visit South Africa, and I feel like I brought a piece of Africa back with me. Similar to a way that spices infuse a dish that they're cooked with, something in the spirit of Africa enters and infuses a person's soul, or at least it's infused my soul. The flavor of it can best be described by this word, Ubuntu. Unfortunately, the global media primarily focuses on the ills of Africa. Daily we read about AIDS and poverty and wars and violence and corruption in Africa, all of which are real and troubling aspects of that continent, but it also gives us a very skewed understanding of one of the world's most important continents. The pictures of Africa that we see make Africa seem so distant, so different. They make Africa seem so separate, so that when thinking of Africa, it's easy to think in terms of us and them. But we are all part of Africa, and Africa is part of all of us. Africa is the cradle of humanity, the birthplace of human life. In scientific terms, it is the origin of our DNA. It is the paradise filled with more plants and animals than anywhere else on earth, out of which the earliest humans sprang forth millions of years ago. As one writer states, after the Ice Age, which covered most of Europe, Homo sapiens started to develop, and only 50,000 years ago did these African Adams and Eves conquer Europe, Asia, America, and the world. Out of Africa is not just a phrase or a movie title, it is the origins of our humanity. In that sense, we are all African. So going to South Africa this summer, I think I expected that there would be sort of a sense of public shame among the people over the brutal history of apartheid. But I was surprised to find that the people there of all races and all ethnicities seemed to be quite proud of their country. And they were proud that they were creating a multicultural society based in equality for all people. I found it refreshing because sometimes talking about race here in the United States can be sort of like talking about politics or religion at the dinner table. It gives everybody indigestion. Our conversations about race here in the States are still too often filled with animosity and guilt and anger and hard feelings. But I found it very hopeful to be in South Africa last week and to see how the people there talked so openly about race and about their history and how proud they were of the nation that they were becoming together. I think one of the biggest differences between South Africa and the United States regarding issues of race is that they have a vision for themselves of being a non-racialized, non-sexist society that's based in Ubuntu. Now, Ubuntu, they tell me, is hard to translate into English, but it means something like, my humanity is caught up in and inextricably bound up in your humanity. You see, here in the West, our ideas of being non-racist, non-sexist are founded on the principles of individual rights, whereas there it is based on an idea of what is best for the whole community. Ubuntu is an old concept, but it's offering a new vision that keeps South Africans of all backgrounds looking forward into a hopeful future instead of looking backward into what can only be described as a dreadful history. There are a few key things that make this vision of the future in South Africa possible. First, they have been willing to honestly face their history through the establishment of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission back in the 90s. And with it, they created a process both to seek and offer forgiveness. Here in the United States, it seems that we tend to try to cover up or neglect the shameful parts of our history. And therefore, it seems that we keep dragging them behind us like an old bag of bones. We can just look at the way the 1921 race riots here in Tulsa have been dealt with, and we can see how secrecy and cover-up plague a society long after the initial damage is done. In the United States, it seems that we are often afraid to talk openly about our history and current reality with regard to race. We want healing. I believe that. But we either don't know how to or don't see a need to take responsibility and seek forgiveness where necessary. And therefore, we continue to have to live in the shadows of our history. Now, it seems that if we would follow the lead of South Africa and be willing to put the truth as we know it on the table and seek forgiveness and reparation, and then we could shed some light where now we have only shadows and old bags of bones. Without a process for healing, we can't bury those bones. And so we'll keep dragging them behind us and passing them on into the future. Another reason I think that it's been easier in South Africa is that to do this, many of the people who were the most persecuted and oppressed are the majority in that country rather than the minority. And they now are in power. But the only reason that this has worked is that when black South Africans took power, they did not use it for revenge or to settle a score, or to go from being the oppressed to the oppressor. Instead, through remarkable leadership and character from men like Nelson Mandela and Bishop Desmond Tutu, South Africa created a vision for their nation and a constitution that is the most progressive that the world has ever seen. Their constitution specifies equal protection for all citizens, regardless of color, gender, religion, political opinion, or sexual orientation. It is the first constitution in the history of the world to include sexual orientation. But we have to remember that the people who created the Constitution know what it's like to be excluded and demeaned due to a characteristic that they were born with. It is amazing to think that as recently as 15 to 20 years ago in South Africa, blacks were being unjustly imprisoned, tortured, killed, segregated, and demeaned under white apartheid rule. And less than 2 decades ago, black South Africans were not afforded the common decencies of human society or basic human rights, and were suffering under the hands of their countrymen. And within such a short time, they have taken power democratically and turned a corrupt, dehumanizing system into what may just become one of the greatest achievements in human democracy and freedom. One of the reasons that such a historic turn of events was possible in South Africa is due to their culture of Ubuntu. Ubuntu is this idea that there exist common bonds between all people, and it is through those bonds and our interactions with our fellow human beings that we discover our true humanity. Instead of Descartes' "I think, therefore I am," Ubuntu states, "I am because we are." In other words, to be human requires affirming the humanity of others, even people quite different from ourselves, because they make us who we are.